Hi everyone, welcome to the 11th episode in this series of videos, Is Marxism Still a Thing? Today we'll look at another basic idea of critical theory. We're following the model of Neil Shanvey, an author and an apologist, and we're following the structure in this book, Is Marxism Still a Thing? The print version is in Portuguese, but there's an ebook version in English. You can purchase it in the link, clicking in the link in the description or in the bio if you're viewing this on Instagram. So today we'll look at another basic idea of critical theory. We've seen two of them in the last episode, and today we'll look at this idea, lived experience. This idea says that oppressed groups, because of their lived experience, have access to more accurate perceptions of reality and are therefore more reliable in their conclusions. Neil Shanvey, he quotes two authors who write the following. They say that the idea that objectivity must be achieved through rational thinking is a specifically Western and male way of thinking. So the most reliable way of obtaining knowledge is not an imperialist, colonialist, rational thinking, but is the lived experience of each individual, of each group. Because of their social status, oppressed groups can achieve a higher consciousness, what's been called the woke consciousness. This idea, this consciousness is the awakening to the reality that the accepted social norms are just ways to perpetuate oppression. Oppressed people belonging to oppressor groups may also obtain this higher form of consciousnness, but it's much more difficult for them because they don't have the lived experience that oppressed groups have. And if oppressed, and sometimes people in the oppressed groups, they didn't quite yet reach this higher state of consciousness, and so they are diagnosed with a form, almost a form of pathology, which they call internalized oppression. Means that oppressed groups are unconsciously dominated by the ideology of the oppressor. So they are still aligned with the oppressor because they didn't free themselves from the ideology of the oppressors. So they still defend some ideas that oppressor groups advocate as well. So the inner world and the subjective perception of the subject take a very prominent role in critical theory, and this is seen in the ways that aggression and violence are understood. Nowadays we hear about microaggressions. These microaggressions are subtle forms of violence experienced by oppressed individuals, almost imperceptible forms of violence that oppressed individuals experience. For example, to ask someone of color, where are they from originally, or assuming the gender of someone, addressing a person as a female just because that person dresses like a woman. Those are forms of violence that are equated with physical violence most of the times. So this is a very serious thing that individuals experience, and it's a legitimate form of knowledge to assume that they are experiencing violence, exactly at the same way that someone would experience physical violence. In order to protect people from these aggressions and this violence, safe spaces are created. Safe spaces are contexts, specifically in the academia, where people can be safe from speeches and ideas that offend and hurt them. So people are locked in echo chambers so that they are not exposed to ideas that may challenge them. So it's plain to see the effects of this kind of practice. It doesn't let people engage in civil discourse because they can be hurt and offended by other different ideas. And also to protect people, there are movements that these days are called cancel culture, which are movements to eliminate from the public sphere people who defend ideas that are deemed dangerous or violent. There have been a lot of different cases in social media. For example, David Chappelle, the American comedian, he was He said men are men and women are women, and because of that, there were protests and demonstrations to have him cancelled from his Netflix show because of that. So many other examples. But another example that comes directly from this focus of critical theory in lived experience is, for example, gender ideology. Gender ideology says that one's perception of his or her own gender trumps any external verification, in particular biological visible reality. So gender identity in the brain takes prominence above biological realities. So it's more reliable. What the individual experiences in his lived experience is more reliable than what the physical reality shows us. This comes directly from critical theory. And just to state a movement, philosophical movement that is very influential in critical theory, postmodernism. The so-called father of postmodernism, Jean-François Lyotard, he writes the following: simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives. What this means for the postmodern philosophical movement, there is no superior interpretation of reality, no supreme interpretation of reality. For example, religion is religions prescribe a supreme form of interpretation of reality. For the postmoderns, for postmodern philosophy, this doesn't exist. So each and every interpretation of reality is equally valid. That's why the experience of the individual, of the experience of each individual, is as valid as the experience of other individual. So it's complete subjectivity. And there is no absolute truth. All truths are equally valid, even if they are contradictory. So just to give a quick overview of this idea of lived experience that is in the base of critical theory, in the basis of critical theory, and very influential in our culture. So that's it for today. In the next episode, we'll look at another basic idea, the last one of Neil Shamby's model. Until then, stay tuned and don't forget, live with Christ at the center.